in a little bit, so why don't we begin with a word of prayer. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for calling us together again. We continue our shared journey, and we do so with great expectations, for we know that you are here ready to lead us deeper into the mystery of your grace and your truth. And for that, we give you thanks. May you be present in our speaking and even more so in our listening, so that we may all grow and faithfully follow the one who came to dwell among us full of grace and truth. And it is in his name that we pray. Amen. All righty. So you all have my condolences. This is probably the toughest unit in the Hebrew scriptures. I will confess, even I have to step back every once in a while and kind of get my bearings. For example, as I was preparing, I thought to myself, okay, Rehoboam, Jeroboam. One was the one who took over after Solomon died, and the other one led a revolt and formed the northern kingdom, and I always get them mixed up. And Rehoboam is the one who was the descendant of Solomon. And what we know is that the united monarchy lasted maybe 100 years. You had Saul, and then you had David, and then David's son Solomon. Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam ascends to the throne, and people come to him, particularly from the northern tribes, and said, you know, your father was very hard on us, and what can we expect from you? And Rehoboam, I give him credit. He says, give me 3 days to think about it. And he talks to his advisors, and he talks to the old learned men, and they say, you know, if you tell them that I'm going to lighten up on you, they'll follow you. And then the younger ones say, you know, come down hard on them. And so I think one of the lines is Rehoboam says, my father disciplined you with whips, I will discipline you with scorpions. And so Jeroboam says, that's it, we're out of here. And I believe there's this famous line, to your tents, O Israel, and the kingdom splits up. You have the northern kingdom of Israel, which consists of 10 tribes. And then you have the southern kingdom of Judah, and that consists of 2 tribes, the tribe of Judah, and then there's the tribe of Benjamin, which was a very small tribe. And they didn't get along. And at times, they would get together to fight a common enemy, but often they were fighting amongst themselves. There was definitely a rivalry. What happens is the northern kingdom is very unstable. It tends to be the one that is also unfaithful. I was fascinated to read that they had, how many kings did they say? 19 kings, and like 12 of them were either killed or committed suicide. Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, so very unstable. And if you did the little exercise on grading the kings, not one of them gets satisfactory. They all get, I think one gets middling grades, but generally they get poor grades for being faithful. And that's how the kings were judged. Weren't judged by victories, expanding territory, wealth, things like that. They were judged by their faithfulness to Yahweh and the covenant. The northern kingdom falls to the Assyrians in 721 BC, Shalmaneser. And what happens is the Assyrians relocate a lot of the people in the northern kingdom, and they bring in foreigners. And that is the genesis of the dislike between the Jews and the Samaritans that we see in the Gospels, particularly with Jesus and his ministry. Jews and Samaritans did not, well, Samaritans as they were called, did not get along. They did not like each other because the Jews considered the Samaritans not true descendants of the covenant. They were basically half-breeds. Okay. Southern Kingdom continues on for another 150 years, but it too eventually falls to the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar. And so let's get right to it. And Southern Kingdom falls in 586 BC. Any questions on any or thoughts on any of the words? Point out that Assyria, Babylonia, that a lot of myths, traditions from Babylon have similarities in the Hebrew scriptures. The most famous one is the Gilgamesh epic. Gold star to anyone who can tell me what Old Testament or Genesis story corresponds to the Gilgamesh epic.
The flood.
Very good, gold star. Yep, nowhere in the flood. Yep, it's very similar. By the way, did anyone see that they think they found Noah's Ark again?
Like
Somewhere in Turkey. Yep. Yeah, they say that they have found human activities around this site that they say looks like it might be where Noah's Ark is. We'll see. All right, let me see. Oh, Josiah on page 84. One of the things that fascinating about Josiah, he's one of the kings that gets good marks. He's from the southern kingdom of Judah. And he has repairs made to the temple. While they are doing the repairs on the temple, they find this old dusty book and they pull it out and they discover that it's the book of Deuteronomy. And nobody knows what it is. And they start reading it. And of course, Deuteronomy has the whole covenant and everything and the 10 commandments and everything. And everybody's just flabbergasted. And Josiah is horrified and goes into penitent mode and tears his garment and brings everybody together. And there's sort of a rededication to the covenant. And I'm trying to think of what it would be like today. You know, and I find it hard to come up with a hypothetical similarity, but you know, maybe finding out that there's a whole nother 10 Bill of Rights or something like that. Everybody forgotten about. That's how dramatic it was. So, yeah. All right. And I also put a star next to a prophet. And one thing that you will learn out of this is a prophet was not a fortune teller. Prophets, their job was to speak for God. Thus says the Lord. Okay. And they only predicted the future in a secondary sort of way. Essentially, what would happen is the prophets would go to the king and the people, and he'd say, you know, this is what you're doing. If you continue to do this, you're going to end up going down this road, and it isn't going to be pretty. But there's still time to turn around and be faithful to God. Thus says the Lord. Unfortunately, human nature being what it is, very often people just continue going on down this road. Yes, David, question.
How did the prophets become prophets?
How did prophets become prophets? Good question.
You're going to declare yourself and expect them to do this.
Sometimes they were anointed. There's reference to that. You know, that's a very good question. They were called by God, but you know, the question is, how do you know they're called by God? And I think part of the answer to that question is that what they said was true. You know, the one that's popping into my mind is Isaiah. And Isaiah was primarily for the southern kingdom of Judah. And he kept saying, look, if you do this, it's not going to end well. And he kept saying, you know, don't trust in alliances with the Egyptians and everything. And eventually it came to happen. You know, but it's a good question. I'm going to have to do some more research on that to confirm how a prophet achieved the status of being a recognized prophet. Because obviously there were false prophets, prophets of Baal. So, yes, another question.
Just a follow-up question to that. So in the Second Kings 9, it talks about the prophets lived apart from society, they dressed differently.
Say again, please.
Sorry, so in Second Kings 9.
Second
it says
Kings 9.
that the prophets lived apart from society, they dressed differently. And so my curiosity began the question of how were they received in society? Were they like a necessary
Yep.
piece of baggage that they had to have with them?
Prophets were not well received. Prophets were not well received. And in fact, there's one of the readings that we have here where Elijah is told to go and speak to Ahab, the king of one of the kings of the northern kingdom, very horrible reputation, and his one of his claims to fame is he was married to a very famous woman who had a very bad reputation. Jezebel, there you go. Jezebel. And so Elijah is told to go to Ahab and pronounce, thus says the Lord to him. And Ahab greets him by saying, "Is it you, O troubler of Israel?" And Elijah responds, it is not I who have troubled Israel, it is you. So prophets were not well received. In fact, we know that also from Jesus, because Jesus criticizes his contemporary and says, so your fathers stoned the prophets. Because prophets basically had messages that people did not want to hear. Brings back a memory. When I was a kid growing up, Congregational Church south of Boston, and I grew up in the church in the time of the 1960s, so civil rights movement and the war in Vietnam. And as a kid, I have memories of some nasty church meetings. Oh yeah, they did not like the minister. Some people did not. A lot of people loved him, including my father. But I can remember I asked my father, I said, why don't people like Reverend Sin? That was my minister's name. And my father said, because too many people go to church to be told what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. And that was the prophet's job. The prophet's job was to say, listen, you got to hear this whether you like it or not. And people didn't like it. And so prophets got into hot water all the time. In fact, why don't we dive into that one? Let's go to 1 Kings. And if you have any other passages you want to jump into, let's do that. But let's go to 1 Kings 18. Famous encounter. This is with Ahab and Jezebel. And Jezebel was a foreign woman. Not that there's anything wrong with being a foreigner, but she brought in her foreign gods. And she had 450 prophets of Baal. Yep. And Elijah is told to go and basically say, look, you've got to the king and the people, you got to decide once and all, who are you going to follow? You're going to follow Yahweh, you're going to follow Baal. And so that's what happens. They have a contest on Mount Carmel. And and actually verse 17 in chapter 18 is where when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" And Elijah answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord." Notice Lord is in all capitals there. You all have all capitals?
Yep, all capitals, yep.
If you see yours, that's right. Yep. Yep, you have that translation. Which one is it? I forget. Oh, yeah. But if you see the Lord in Bible translations that have all capitals, what does that refer to again? A specific name for God.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the name that God gave Moses at the burning bush when he says, you know, if I go to the people of Israel and lead them out, they're gonna say, who sent you? And what's your name? And God says, I am who I am, or Yahweh. So whenever you see capital Lord, that means that's the sacred word. And faithful Jews today will not say that word. They'll substitute Adonai. Okay. Okay. So then he says, now, therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Okay. And here's another famous line. So you keep going. Verse 20 gathers all the people together. And verse 21, Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? Wonderful metaphor. What do some other translations have there?
Mine is, how long do you mean to hobble first on one leg and then on the other?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
This just.
Yeah, okay.
This just says limping with.
Limping, you know, it says limping. Yep. Yeah.
Two different opinions.
Two different opinions. Yeah. Anybody else have something besides limping? So what is it?
Straddle the issue.
Straddle the issue? Oh, interesting. I don't like that as much.
Sit on the fence.
Oh, how long do you sit on the
Oh,
fence?
wow.
Okay, yeah, okay.
King James says, how long I'll halt ye between two opinions.
Two different, hobble between two,
How long halt, HALT,
halt. Oh, interesting. Yeah,
between two opinions.
yep, yep. So,
It's how long we were.
okay, waiver, yep, yep, yep. So, you know, in essence, Elijah is essentially saying the same thing that Joshua said to the people when they went into the promised land. Choose this day whom you will serve. Will you serve the Lord, or will you serve the gods of Egypt? And then he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's basically what Elijah is saying here. So they have this contest, and they each get a bull, and the prophets of Baal sacrifice the bull, and then they are supposed to call down fire. And whichever God brings the fire down and consumes the offering, that is the true God. And so the prophets of Baal, they do the incantations, they get themselves all worked up, and Elijah taunts them. There's sarcasm in here. And actually, I like my old RSV better because it uses the euphemisms, but look at verse 27. And at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, in other words, he's distracted, or he is relieving himself. The Revised Standard says he is turned aside.
Mine says has gone aside.
Okay, that's basically what it means.
Yeah.
He's behind some bushes relieving himself. What translation do you have, Nancy? I bet you have the,
Oh. Oops.
you should tell you right in the front. I'm guessing it's going to be.
Revised standard.
Yep, the Revised Standard. Yep, that's the one that I grew up with. So yes, he is turned aside. Or he's gone on a journey, you know, like if you're a god, if you get too far away, you can't hear. Or he's sleeping. Okay.
Sleeping, he needs to be woken up.
Yeah, he needs to be woken up. Elijah is taunting them. This is dripping with sarcasm, and they cut themselves and everything. And so then Elijah has his turn, and he says, okay, get this big vat of water and pour it on, you know, because water is going to make it hard for the fire to come down. They have a second one, a third one, and the fire comes down, and everybody says, oh, that's the real God. And then Elijah says, go get them. And they kill all the prophets of Baal.
Oh.
And Jezebel is not happy. And she basically says, I think it's in a further one. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, okay, it's actually in the next one. So we then go on, and Elijah is at Mount Sinai. Essentially, Jezebel says to Elijah, I know what you've done to my prophets. Before this day, I'm going to do to you and more so what you did to them. In other words, before the day's over, Elijah, you're a dead man. And this, you know, and the contest, you know, it does speak to us. You know, we have all of our false gods in our society. We talked a little bit about this last week. And, you know, they can get so tempting and whatever is first in your life, whatever your life revolves around, that is your number one God. And, you know, this is why I like the wording to the Ten Commandments. And the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, okay? Now, jealous doesn't mean that God is petty and it's like the little girl on the playground that says, you know, if you want to be my friend, you can't have any other friends. It isn't jealousy for God's sake, it's jealousy for our sake, because God knows that when we put Yahweh first, everything else in our lives falls into place. You know, it's similar to what Jesus says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And that makes some people uncomfortable, but I don't see it that way, because what I see is if you love the Lord, everything else is going to take on greater meaning. Okay, I'm going to love other people better, more, richer, more fully, more gracefully, if I love the Lord first. Everything else falls into place. So it isn't an either or, it's basically Jesus saying, put me first, because when you put me first, everything else, all your other relationships are going to be better. You know, you're going to love those in your family in a way that is healthy and faithful. Okay.
So speaking of relationships.
All right. No, go ahead.
Presumably Elijah was a godly man.
And was a what? A godly man, yep.
With Jezebel, no, she worked for Baal. What was that about?
What, Elijah?
Yeah.
Oh, no, Elijah wasn't, he was confronting her. Elijah is confronting Jezebel.
It was
Yeah.
Ahab. Wasn't it? It was Ahab was her.
Oh, how did Ahab end up with Jezebel?
Oh, well, but Ahab was.
Ahab wasn't a faithful king. Yeah, and Jezebel was his wife. And Elijah goes to them and said, she didn't like him, and she's the one who's, yeah, and she's the one that says, you better get out of town, Elijah, because you're a dead man.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yep. Like I said, this is one of the most challenging chapters that we're going to deal with, because it's all these relationships, all these kings, all these alliances and things like that. Yeah, well, they do give you with on page yeah, what page is it? Yeah, 94, 95, they give you a list of the kings from the two kingdoms, and those dotted lines show when they reign, and so that you can line them up with the other kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yep. Yes,
Why was it that Ahab was allowed to be that way instead of the king? Is it because everyone else was supposedly like that, as we know? And that's what they were okay with it because of
so,
that?
you know, basically, things had devolved to the point where his behavior was normal. That's the way I would define it, yep. Plus, he was a king, and you don't mess with the kings. So let's look at Elijah on Mount Sinai, because this has so much. So Elijah, he goes out to the Negev. Let me see, this is 19, right? Yeah, 19. And yeah, and Jezebel in verse 2 says, sends a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid, and he goes to Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is in the southern part of Judah. So Elijah has gone from the northern kingdom through the southern kingdom to the very bottom of the southern kingdom, Beersheba, which is on the edge of what's known as the Negev desert. And he's there, he's feeling sorry for himself, okay? And he says, verse 4, but Elijah himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my father's." How would you describe Elijah's mental state here?
Depressed.
Depressed.
Yeah.
Yep. Defeated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Discouraged.
What's that?
Discouraged.
Discouraged. Yep, absolutely. And so he lays down, sleeps on the, and when he wakes up, he hears a voice says to him, "Rise," and he, in verse 6, and he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water, and he ate and drank, and he lay down again. And it comes the second time, he says, "Rise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he rose and ate and drank, and went the strength of 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb. And Horeb is the other name for what mountain? Sinai. Yep. Okay. And so here's Elijah on Mount Sinai, way out in the wilderness. The Sinai desert is very desolate and remote. And so look what God says in verse 9. God says to Elijah, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah says, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets in the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." How would you describe Elijah's mental state here?
Not good.
What, not good?
Not good.
No. And does how would you describe God's response to Elijah? He tells him to go out and stand on the mountain, and
Send down the lightning.
yep. This is a famous another famous passage. So Elijah goes and stands out on the mountain, and let me see. End of verse 11. "And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore the mountains and broke it in pieces. It broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And then there's an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then there was a fire, and the Lord was not in the fire." And some people have described this as a volcanic eruption. We should think about it. It has some earthquake, fire, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And how does God eventually speak to Elijah? He's not in the wind. Go ahead, Stephanie. I know you know the answer to this one. Whispers to him. Yeah. I'm curious what different translations. I know what yours has.
Okay,
Go ahead.
because you.
It'd be verse 12.
Verse 12, okay.
Yeah.
"And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, was still small voice."
Yep. Still small voice.
Yeah.
That's what I'm used to for the Revised Standard. God speaks to Elijah in a still small voice. You know, there's crash, bang, boom, and there's a still small voice. What do others have for translations there?
Mine says a gentle whisper.
A gentle whisper? Yeah, anything?
Soft whisper.
Soft whisper?
I like them.
A light murmuring. What does the King James have?
The still small voice.
It does have the still small voice. Yep. So then God says to Elijah, "Get up, go back. When you get there, you're going to anoint this person to be king of Syria. They're going to anoint this person to be king of Israel," which means that bye-bye Ahab. Okay. And so what's going on in this passage? How would you describe it? How would you describe what God does all the way from Beersheba to Mount Sinai? What's that?
I would think that he'd be overwhelmed.
Who would be overwhelmed? Elijah? Yep. So you were gonna say?
Try again, you know?
Try again, yeah. So I would say it's even a little stronger than try again. I love this passage because Elijah goes out to the Negev, to Beersheba. He's he's had a tough go of it. You know, he stood up for the Lord and now his life is in danger. And so he's given nourishment and whatnot. But it's almost as if God knows. Well, so at that point, what do you think Elijah should have done? He's nourished and everything.
To go out and try again.
Yeah, but he doesn't.
He doesn't do
He
it.
goes further into the desert. He's still running away. And
Mhm.
so when God shows up at Mount Sinai, I think God wants to get Elijah's attention. And so, in other words, Elijah meets Mr. Nice Guy at Beersheba.
Mhm.
Okay. At Beersheba, Elijah meets the God who gives him a hug and basically
Oh,
says,
I see.
there, Elijah, it'll be okay.
Mhm.
At Mount Sinai, Elijah meets the God who gives him a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
You know, he says, what are you doing here, Elijah?
Yeah.
Get back in there. You still got work to do. I'm not done with you. I gave you the comforts and the hugs that you needed back then, back in Beersheba. Now I'm going to give you a kick in the backside. Okay. And I love this story because I stop and I think, do I have room in my faith for both of those gods?
Mhm.
You know, do I have room in my faith for a God who's gonna, you know, it's funny. I can, I remember I used to go see this nun sister for counseling many years ago, and I went in one day, and I was feeling sorry for myself. I just remember she looked at me and she says, you know, she says, if you think you're going to come here every week and have me hold your hand, you better think again, bub.
Oh, wow.
And I'm thinking, wow, okay, that's what I needed.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I needed. Go ahead.
It seems like it's a recurrent theme in the
Mhm.
Old Testament. I mean, it reminds me of, was it Moses?
Yeah, Moses. Yeah, Moses.
Where God,
Yeah.
you know, takes kind of the same
Mhm.
hint with him. and
Yeah, yep.
Says that, no, you don't get to feel sorry for yourself, get back out.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And you know, God in God's wisdom knows what we need at each moment. And God knew that that's what Elijah needed when he was in Beersheba. And now he's at Mount Sinai and no. It's a New Testament story, a miracle of Jesus that relates to this. And it's the healing of the crippled man at the pool of Bethesda. And the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, there was this belief that when the water stirred, it meant that an invisible angel's wings had disturbed the water. And the first person in the pool gets healed. So Jesus shows up in this crippled man on a mat. You know, they get talking and Jesus says, you know, do you want to be healed? And the guy says, yeah, but I got no one to pick me up and put me in the water when the water stirs. And it's almost as if the crippled man is saying, you know, Jesus, will you stay here and put me in the water? And Jesus got other things to do. And he says, if you want to walk, pick up your
Get in there.
mallet pat, what do you call it? Your what do you call it?
King?
No, pick up your mat. There's some
Your
I
mat,
can't
okay.
remember, but anyways, Jesus says, if you want to walk. I'm not going to do it for you. I'll help you do it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why Jesus, whenever he heals someone, you go back and look, almost every single time, who does he give credit for the miracle to? Pardon me?
Their faith.
Yeah, the person. He says, go, your faith has made you well. Okay. So, you know, I love this story because it challenges us. Is there room in our faith for the God who is going to challenge us from time to time? Doesn't mean that the God who comforts us isn't there, but there's also a God who says, look, you know, it's time for you to face reality, time for you to do what you can do. And so that's one of the reasons why I love this story. How are we doing on time? Oh, we still got good time. Okay. Yeah, Kings 2:22, that's the discovery of the book of the law. Why am I not seeing? Where's the story of Naaman? Oh, there we went to Second Kings. Let's look at Second Kings.
What chapter?
Second Kings 5-9, and I
Five.
will I will confess that I am looking at the ones that speak to me, but if you have others, please throw them out there. 5:1-19. You know what? Let's read this through, and I understand that not everybody likes to read. So if you don't like reading in front of people, just say pass, and that's perfectly understandable. But let's read this story. We'll go to my left, and I'll start. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper.
Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little maid from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy."
And Bill.
Why it's so different? The third verse, right?
Fourth, actually. Yeah.
Fourth.
When Naaman heard this, he went to the king and told him what the girl had said. The king said, "Go to the king of Israel and take this letter to him." So Naaman set out, taking 30,000 pieces of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of fine clothes.
And Maxwell.
And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy."
Okay,
And
and
it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he rent his clothes and said, "Am I God, to kill and to make alive? That this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy. Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me."
I'm just gonna stop for a second. So you understand what the king of Israel is saying here. He's basically saying that the king of Syria is setting him up and looking for an excuse to go to war with him, because he's sending his top general Naaman and saying, you know, we've got word that from this Jewish child that says that Naaman can be cured in Israel, so go ahead and cure him. And of course, the king doesn't know how to do that. It's impossible. And so he's convinced that the king of Syria is using this as a setup to and a pretext to go to war. Okay, David. Verse 8, yeah.
Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his garments and sent word to the king, "Why have you torn the garments? Let him come to me and find out that there is a prophet in Israel."
And, yeah.
So Naaman came with his team and chariot and drew up at the door of Elisha's house.
Elijah sent the messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed."
But even that they realized, saying, "I was telling myself, he will surely come out, stand and call on the name of Yahweh his God, and will wave his hand over the spot and cure the skin disease."
You get a couple of funny names,
Yes.
Arbana and Farpar.
Rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Can I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went off in a rage.
But his servants came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean?"
So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean.
He returned to Elijah with all his men and said, "Now I know that there is no God but the God of Israel. So please, sir, accept a gift from me."
But he said, "As the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take it, but he refused.
And Naaman said, "Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules, burden of earth?" For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord.
But I trust the Lord will forgive your servant this, when my master enters the temple of Ryman to worship there, then I too, as his adjutant, must bow down in the temple of Ryman. May the Lord forgive your servant this.
Go in peace, Elijah replied.
Yep, that one name it, okay, yep, that's good, yep. All righty, so what do you think about this encounter between Naaman and, now, by the way, notice this is not Elijah, it's Elisha. Okay, Elisha is Elijah's protege. One of the passages they did not have you read, which is I'm a little surprised, and maybe we'll have a little time to delve into it, is when Elijah is taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. Yeah, one of my favorite choir anthems that actually Marsha Cutlip is going to have us sing sometime in the next few months is Ride the Chariot. I'm gonna ride in the chariot in the morning, Lord. I'm gonna ride in the chariot in the morning, Lord. I'm getting ready for the judgment day, my Lord, my Lord. And so Elisha then takes over for him. And by the way, one of my favorite verses in the Hebrew scriptures has to do with Elisha. Yes, Elisha. And Elisha's walking along one day, and I'll have to look it up, but I definitely know it's in there. And these kids come out and they start teasing him and taunting him. And they say to Elisha, "Go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head." And Elisha warns them, and they keep doing it, and a she-bear comes out and eats them all up. A she-bear comes out and eats them all up. One of my favorite passages in the Hebrew scriptures. But anyway, so Naaman. Exactly. Exactly. I used to every once in a while make the youth groups read that passage. Let this be a warning to you. Yeah, be nice. So what do you think about Naaman, and what does the story have to say to us? How do you describe Naaman's reaction when Elisha tells him to go and wash in the Jordan River?
He wants to be cured, but only how he wants to be.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
It,
exactly. And I think that's one lesson here is, we want sometimes God to answer our prayers the way we want them to be answered. And God has other plans. And tell me if I'm repeating myself here. The story about the guy who is in his house and they've had torrential rains and there's a dam up the road that's about to break. Have I told you the story? No. So police cruiser comes up to the house and says to the guy, you got to get out now, the dam's going to break. And the guy says, "Oh no," he says, "I trust in the Lord will deliver me." And a little while later, the water's rising again, and rowboat comes up, and the officer says, "You better climb in. You haven't got much time." He says, "No, I trust in the Lord will deliver me." Rises more. Guy ends up on the roof of his house, and a helicopter comes by and says, "This is your last chance." He says, "No, I trust in the Lord will deliver me." The dam breaks, washes the house away. The guy drowns. He goes to heaven. He gets to heaven. He says, "Lord, I put my trust in you, and you didn't deliver me." And the Lord says, "I tried. I sent you a cruiser, I sent you a rowboat, and I sent you a helicopter." God does not always.
You have to have.
Who are we to tell God how God has to do things? Okay, and Naaman's indignant because he's this big shot. He's a general.
Yeah.
And he's a general in an army that has defeated the Israelites. Because remember, it's the little girl who told him, who could heal him, was taken from Israel in one of their raids. So he's an important person. And let me ask you this question. Does Elijah even go out to talk to him? Go back and look.
And that was,
Verse,
The servants,
yeah, verse 10.
sent them.
Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, you know, how indignant Naaman must have felt. I'm this important person, and the prophet doesn't even come out to me himself. He sends his servant out to tell me to go wash in the Jordan River, which is a second-rate river compared to the rivers back home. You know, Naaman is, well, maybe a little bit of a pun intended. God and Elijah are knocking Naaman off of his high horse,
okay.
you know?
I don't
He-
understand how could Naaman be this big,
If he's got
General.
leprosy?
and he, yeah,
Yeah, it's a good question, because usually with leprosy, you were
yeah,
ostracized and
Right.
put out. The only thing I can think of is that Naaman had success before he developed his leprosy,
Okay.
which might be a possibility.
It looked like it wasn't full leprosy.
This is true.
Skin as well.
Right, exactly. So leprosy was an all-encompassing term that was used back then for eczema or psoriasis and all kinds of diseases. But people were deathly afraid of it because they didn't understand it. And it's actually known as Hansen's disease. And do you know what leprosy actually does?
your skin falls off, right?
Well,
Clot.
it's sort of, but what it actually happens is it kills nerves. Okay, so a person with leprosy, they're deformed only because if you have leprosy, okay, and you're washing floors, I'm just using an example here, and you're dipping a rag in hot water and it's scalding, you don't realize it is. So you're doing damage to your skin and everything. Or if you're
Hammering.
rowing or something and there's a nail or something and you don't even feel it. So what would happen is that, they literally do things and they would rub their toes away and whatnot. And so people were terrified because it was you ended up looking hideous. And so they were terrified of it. But what happens here is, and I wrote this in my notes here. Sometimes in order for God to make you, God has to first break you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. How so?
You know, us, and I can listen to it.
Yeah, if you know best, you're not going to listen to God. So sometimes God has to let you hit bottom. Sometimes God has to break you to make you. It isn't something that God takes pleasure in, but I'll give you another example. New Testament, and we'll talk about this down the road too. Apostle Paul, before he became an apostle, he was a persecutor of Christians, okay? And he's on his way to Damascus, along the Damascus Road, and what happens? Yeah, he's blinded, flash of light, can't see. What does that mean? He can't, he's totally dependent on the people around him. He's totally dependent. Paul, this very important person who has the power to bring people back to Jerusalem and persecute them, suddenly he is basically an invalid. And then on top of that, how does Paul get healed? God sends a man by the name of Ananias, a Christian, to Paul. He sends a person who Paul was originally supposed to arrest and drag back to Jerusalem. And Ananias walks into that room, sees Paul blind, totally a shell of who he was. And he says to him, Brother Saul, not just Saul. He doesn't say, you know what, Saul, I'm here because God told me. I don't want to be here, but I'm going to do it because God told me to do it. He walks in and he says, Brother Saul. And so I see that as another situation in which Saul had to be broken before he could become the Apostle Paul. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I see a question formulating there, Stephanie, no?
Well, it's just that in this study Bible, Pamela Pratt.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, yeah.
First study Bible, she said it was so pretty.
Uh-huh.
When she's doing her devotion work, it's hard for her to use this one.
Yeah.
Thank you. So she gave me this.
Uh-huh.
I'm so excited to be able to read the commentary.
Oh, of this, of Naaman?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, saying that Naaman was a famous general, and so he knew politicians, he knew all these important.
Yes, he did.
people. And I was thinking about how, you know, we put our trust, it almost goes back to the first commandment that love God above all
Mm-hmm.
other,
Mm-hmm.
above everything else, because, you know, Naaman was thinking that his relationships, his access to power, and, you know, we've had 3 deaths in our family
Mm.
since September.
Oh, dear.
And, you know, we depended on, medicine and on wonderful doctors, and
Sure.
and I'm not being critical, but, you know, this belief that we have
Mhm.
that, you know, the best oncologist can save you.
Not always.
You know, it's like we worship at these altars of
Modern medicine and, mhm,
modernity
mhm.
and all this stuff, and it's like,
Yeah,
no.
no, yeah,
It's very,
yeah, yeah.
it's so humbling.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely is. And, you know, as you were talking, modern medicine can do great things, but I was thinking, I referenced my stepmother a couple of weeks ago in the sermon. And, you know, she died of this disease called bronchiectasis. Okay. What bronchiectasis is, your bronchial tubes are supposed to be smooth, and hers were pitted and rutted. And so she would get little drops of water, and she'd have these coughing fits and whatnot. We just said it was nerves and everything, but it got progressively worse. And she couldn't eat and whatnot. And in retrospect, what we realize, or what we're pretty sure about, is back in 1968, she had tongue cancer, and Mass General saved her life. But in saving their life, they gave her cobalt radiation. And back then, it wasn't as refined as it was.
Yeah.
And we have no doubt that that cobalt, you know, did the damage to her
Yeah.
bronchial tubes. But, you know, we can't complain. She got 40 years of life. But my point being is that, you know, modern medicine can do amazing things, but they're not God's. And, you know, this is why I trust nurses in the hospital more than I trust doctors. Because the doctors, like, they have this God mentality. They don't like to lose. And, you know, I think I may have told you the story. I had a woman, well, Millie Clark. No, not Millie Clark. Who was, no, it was,
Betty Ryder.
no, it was, Callie Fitzgerald. House fire, badly burned. Her husband died in the house fire. And the doctors kept saying, oh, we're gonna do another graft. And the family said, yeah, but what's her quality gonna be, life gonna be like? And they finally asked me to go in for moral support, because they wanted to tell the doctors, no, enough, let her go. You know, we need to let God be God. And, you know, I think that's what's going on here is, situations where people didn't let God be God. They had another God or other things to do. And famous story, I absolutely love this story. When Louis XIV died, and he was known as the great sun god, or the sun king, I'm sorry, he was the great sun king. And when they had his funeral in the big cathedral, toward the end of the service, there was a single candle on the altar. And I believe it was Cardinal Richelieu. And he walked over to the candle and he snuffed it. The candle symbolized the greatness of the great Sun King. And Richelieu snuffed the candle out. And in the darkness of the cathedral, he said, only God is great. And I just love that story. And I'll give you one more little. Oh, we got a couple minutes. One of my favorite sayings, tennis player Martina Navratilova. She was once asked how important the game of tennis was to her. And she said it was her life, and they asked her a little bit more, and she said, well, she says, I'm not just involved in the game of tennis, I'm committed to the game of tennis. And the person interviewer said, well, what's the difference between being involved and committed? And she says, well, it's ham and eggs. And he said, what do you mean? And she said, when it comes to ham and eggs, the chicken is involved, the pig is committed. You know? And I think it's the same thing is true when it comes to our faith. Are we involved in our faith? Are we committed to our faith? You know, if we're involved in our faith, the return isn't going to be nearly as great and as wonderful as when you're committed to your faith. You know, you get what you put in, you know, and so what's going through all of these stories here is, you know, God is God. Let God, be humble before God, listen, let God, you know, next week, we're going to talk about the prophets. And one of the things the prophets did was they would sometimes use these object lessons. And there's one object lesson about a potter and a clay. And, you know, he goes down and he sees the potter and you know, if the potter made a mistake, he just take the clay and he'd lump it back together and start again. And said, you know, that's what our relationship with God is. You know, God is molding us, and sometimes, you know, we do something and everything gets a little out of kilter, and so God has to kind of reshape us. And there's a hymn. I am the pot. No, you are the potter. I am the clay. Pardon me?
Just as I am.
Just as yeah. And there's also a refrain that we sing after the prayers sometimes. It says, meld me, make me. I can't remember. You recognize it, right? Yeah, exactly. And are we willing to be molded, you know, by God? I'll be the first to admit, don't always like it, but you know, it's sort of like that. When I was a kid, and I was feeling well, my father insisted on putting Vicks Vapor Rub on me. I hated that stuff. Oh, it stunk, and that's all you could smell for the rest of the night. But I knew it was good for me.
Opens your sinuses.
What's that?
It opens your sinuses.
Does that what it does?
Yes, it does.
Oh, I knew it was supposed to do something. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't like it. But you know, it was what was good for me.
Yeah.
Any unanswered questions, things that people wanted to raise up before we
We're doing the
wrap it up for another week?
They give any? So they have the earlier kings are like working
Yep.
with Assyria, like fight Egypt and other kingdoms, and then eventually Assyria just comes in and conquers the north. I mean, I don't know if they.
The Assyrians conquer the north. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't understand. I guess it's geopolitics. Like
Yep.
they were fighting, they were allies, and then it looks like they turned on that. At some
Oh
point.
yeah. Oh yeah. And essentially what happens is the Assyrians ebb in power, and then the Babylonians take over.
Yeah.
And then after the Babylonians, Gold Star, who knows what kingdom comes next?
Persians. Right.
Persians. Yep. And I don't know if that's going to be one of the readings, but one of my favorite is so the Persians bring back all of the, or maybe it's Nebuchadnezzar. No, maybe Babylonians. I take that back. My apologies. The Babylonians, they ransack Jerusalem and they bring all the implements from the temple and everything. And Nebuchadnezzar's son, I think it's Belshazzar. Anyways, he has a banquet. He gets rip-roaring drunk, and he has them bring out the vessels from the temple, and you know, basically sacrilege. And then there's the handwriting on the wall.
Oh, the handwriting.
The finger.
The finger,
Yeah, the hand. That's where last week I said a lot of biblical, or a lot of our sayings come from the Bible. You know, the handwriting is on the wall. That comes from the book of Daniel. And this hand appears when they're using the sacred vessels for a debaucherous party, and a hand appears and writes on the wall the words many, many tekel parson. And nobody knows what it means. They finally bring Daniel, similar to Joseph, you know, interpreting, and basically he says, you know, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting, and tonight you will be assassinated, and your kingdom will be divided between the Persians and the Medes. And so there's a lot of geopolitics in this period too. And, you know, the reality is that even at the height of its glory, the United Kingdom of Israel was a small fish among some very big powers. You had Egypt to the south, which kind of ebbed and flowed, and you had Syria, which had its ups and downs, but you had, you know, the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, and the Persians, and the Greeks, then the Romans. So they were a small fish in a very big pond. Yep. All righty, thank you, everyone.